Ba-bam! Good morning. We are resuming recording. I don't know how we did this, but this is number 11. People can still register. I got 4 more people yesterday. How exciting is that? I'm making a donation to Crazy Horse based on the number of people who register. So keep it coming because they deserve all the money possible. We'll talk more about that at the end. So there's one more. Tomorrow is the last webinar. Please tell people to register. Sounds great. Today is another wild card option, knowing what you don't know, medical microaggressions. What we're going to be doing today specifically is using the promise that most healthcare centers have, which is that they would like to have long-term relationships with their patients, as a metaphor, because I believe there's somebody that you were accidentally nice to in a grocery store and they remember it. And I think the idea of interacting with other people as if you're going to have a lifetime relationship with them, even if it's just in their memory, is kind of a nice way of navigating the planet. Can I do that 100% of the time? No, I'm a total jerk. But if I'm leading a webinar, I can at least aspire to do it occasionally. Or like I say, do the best you can with what you got some of the time, right? So what we're going to be doing is reviewing medical microaggressions. So things I have actually heard in healthcare centers by a number of different kinds of people working in healthcare centers. And we're going to have a discussion about why that might limit their lifetime connection or relationship with that particular patient. It's going to be fun. So buckle up. That's today. So knowing what you know, what you don't know, and using medical microaggressions as the metaphor. We're going to be covering all different kinds of identities today, and I am quoting real things, but I do probably need to warn some of you that some of these things that were really actually stated in front of my presence are pretty offensive. And so that's what we're going to be using as a metaphor, but I want us to look at what happens when we are consciously or unconsciously doing or saying something and how it would impact our ability to have a trusting long-term relationship with someone else. It doesn't have to be an emotional or romantic relationship. It can be a customer service relationship, a loyalty relationship, or just the relationship that happens when we remember different people in our lives, right? So that's kind of the metaphor that we're using today. But I probably should warn you, some of this stuff's pretty offensive. All right, texting number, if you're interested, is 202-670-4262. And don't forget to follow me on the Instagrams. Okay, sounds great. Thank you, Administrative Assistant Emily, for putting it into the chat. If you are interested in these real life stories, I actually created this workshop specifically for health clinics when I was doing a presentation. I decided to kind of embed myself. And so as I was traveling, doing different contracts, I went to different kind of waiting rooms of health clinics. And this is where all the quotes came from. And then I presented them all together to an association of like standalone clinics. It was an awkward conversation, not gonna lie, but it was a really good conversation. So then I like to now use it as a metaphor for anyone, regardless of what your profession is. So let's start off first with, what do you know? What do you know? What do you know you know, and what do you know you don't know? This is kind of, I married a philosopher, so we have these conversations all the time, but we often don't stand around and think about what we are conscious of, what we are unconscious of. And there is always going to be more information that we don't even know we don't know because we haven't thought about it, and then we haven't decided the binary of whether or not we do or we do not know it, right? So I just want you to kind of sit in that like intellectual space. It kind of helps people also not potentially be defensive if maybe you have said some of these things, thought some of these things. And I also want us to give a space that some of these things may have been said to us or about us, right? And so if we can give a little grace and recognize that not everybody is consciously interacting with everyone, and that includes us, right? So in the medical universe, at least, I hear the terms cultural competency and cultural humility. And I think that the idea of cultural humility is starting to spread You're welcome to put in the chat if you're from a particular kind of industry or kind of market, whether or not your market uses cultural competency or cultural humility as language. Just put in the chat what the industry is and which one you use if you're familiar with them. While you're doing that, I would say I don't care what it's called. We spend a lot of time kind of renaming things. I think cultural competency kind of got to kind of knowing these things, knowing vocabulary, knowing the stereotypes of certain communities, being able to screen or know for specific different kinds of communities, different kinds of faith backgrounds, etc. And then once we know that, we kind of feel like we have a decoder ring because we're now competent because we know these three things, and humans are more complex than that. And cultural humility is kind of recognizing that humans are more complex than this like list of stereotypes. So the idea of cultural humility is that you're able to engage with another person with all of your training and experience, but you also kind of set it to the side and then really engage with that particular individual to find out about this human's experience and how does it plinko through your competency. And that the act of being able to do both at the same time is more around cultural humility. I would challenge that there's a lot of very powerful, resourced human beings who are spending a lot of time trying to prove that they are more culturally competent or more culturally have more cultural humility than the next person, instead of just recognizing that they have unconscious behaviors that they're not aware of. So I'm not really going to kind of fall into this, but perhaps this is how it might show up in your universe. So knowledge, the idea is, this is not getting epistemological. It's too early for that. But the idea is that you know this, you know you don't know this, you don't know that you know this, and you don't know that you don't know this. Those are kind of the four general areas. And if the main goal here is the ability to leave things better, I think of it like a campsite. When you pull up into a campsite, that trash might not be yours, but you could leave the campsite better than when you found it. If we could generally treat each other that way, I probably would have to get a regular job. But luckily, you won't do it consistently. So that works out good because my dog's got some sensitive stomachs. Usually someone wants to know, like, can you give me an example of something that you don't know, which I also find very funny because there's more stuff that you don't know than stuff that you do know you don't know. So I'm going to throw out, what color socks am I wearing? You don't know. And prior to me asking the question, you don't actually know that you don't know. Now you know you don't know. Do you see the difference? And now that you know that you don't know, often what happens is this little bubbling up of like, is she going to tell us? Because now you're aware that you don't know the information that is critical to your life's well-being of what color socks I'm wearing, right? Okay, so if that is kind of how knowledge works, let's say you know more, there's always going to be bias, and we've already covered positive and negative bias. We spend a lot of time in DEI world only talking about negative bias, but positive bias can also impact reality. It can impact our relationships. It can put a lot of pressure on someone else to measure up to the positive bias that you might have. So as we're going through these, I just want you to kind of pay attention to where your positive bias or your negative bias goes. The different staffing, in case any of you work in healthcare, some of these quotes come from all of these different kinds of positions within these different like independent health centers that I listen to. I also want to point out that if you don't work in a health center, sometimes you still want to know like who the person is that said what, but you're probably, remember the boat activity? Notice if you're writing a story about who said what to who, and then you might be trying to like make it make sense. That's your work, and it might be based on 7 words or less. Just notice what's happening. As we are moving through, I'm going to take each of the things and I'm going to divide them up by identities. And then we're going to talk about the misinformation or the impact it might have. So let's start at the top. So a director of a health center. This is a health center I was coming to do a training in. So I was sitting in the waiting room and the director of the health center came into the waiting room. I didn't know that's who it was, but then I did the training. And they literally said, as they were walking in, they didn't understand why they had to go on a training for racism, for staff development, because it's just too far. It isn't a healthcare issue. Fascinating and a fun little introduction, because then I got to walk in the room and be like, hi, I'm the person doing your staff training. But I just want to notice that even if your leadership doesn't understand how social identities might impact services, you have broader conversations to talk about. I have been inundated. I feel like my social media platforms somehow know that I secretly watched my very first Super Bowl in a very, very long time. So now everything is filled up with all the conversations in reference to the Super Bowl. Thank you, Pat Dwyer. I did also watch my first Puppy Bowl, but then I fell asleep. Anyway, what is interesting to me is the conversations around the Black national anthem that was sung. And a lot of times the language that I'm noticing in these arguments is that those liberals are being really divisive by coming up with all these different identities. And we don't need to be divisive, we need to be united. We're America, right? And I just want to throw out there that there is, yes, that could look divisive, and it is also representative, right? And so being able to understand the nuanced difference between division and representation, I think is going to be really helpful in this conversation. And that if you are represented, then those elements may not exist in the other person. So then now there's an opportunity for these elements to show up in a conversation. That's not divisive, it's representative, but it might feel divisive, especially if it's an identity you don't experience, because now that's on you and your own responsibility of recognizing, I'm being talked to about something I didn't know about. Do you see how that could lead to defensiveness and make us feel like we're intentionally going through some kind of division? It's not about division as much as it's about representation. So this health director may not see racism having anything to do with healthcare, and their patients might experience some impact, positive or negative potentially, about how their racial identity is perceived and what that has meant for their healthcare or healthcare access. So just using it as an example. Okay, step one in doing this work is getting comfortable with the fact that there is way more information that you don't even know you don't know. That's all you have to do. If you could just get there, we don't even have to go through the other slides, but now I've really built it up. So let's go to age first. So when we were doing, do you remember in the Wayback Machine when I did an inventory of my subordinated and dominant identities that were visible or invisible, and you in theory did that on your own piece of paper as well out there, but I don't know that for sure, right? So age is one that changes and evolves depending on your context. It also changes and evolves whether or not it's visible or it is invisible. So in a given moment, in a given context, how does age show up? As a subordinate or dominant identity, as visible or invisible? Sometimes you need another person to be able to kind of find out if you're going to be given unicorn points or they're going to be taken away. So in this context, when staff members were referring to interns, new staff, or actually age younger people as kids in the office, like what would that do to someone's professional development or feeling empowered or connected to the older people that are on staff? It is also very possible that the quote kids in the office have a nickname for the old people too. But if we're going to talk about representation or division, notice how that is going to create kind of an us-them dynamic between the new kids and the old fogies. Just noticing it. Again, we're not fixing anything. But most of us don't even know that we're even saying that when we talk about newbies or kids or something. Obviously, it can have all different kinds of impacts of what this means, whether people can vote, whether people can drink. If they're non-traditional students, they could be undergraduate students that are in their 40s. People are very complicated, but we often don't think about that because we don't know what we don't know. That's going to be a theme. Okay, now let's go to ability. We did a whole webinar specifically about disability and accessibility. So in this particular case, people with disabilities can't have sex. And this was a response when a nurse practitioner had talked to a patient who was coming in who happened to be in a wheelchair and didn't give the patient any kind of sexually transmitted infection surveys or any of that information related to sex, nor did they have any conversation in their intake form about what their sexual activities were. And when asked, why is all of this stuff blank on the clipboard, the nurse practitioner just said, oh, she's in a wheelchair. She obviously can't have sex. That's a leap, right? Like that's not necessarily true. And by assuming that there was no conversation about this patient's sexual activity, which is really going to limit or possibly even lead to really bad advice about what kind of medical treatment or medication or something like that that the person may have. Is this making sense how we're using this as a metaphor? Okay, great. I might be going too slow. Okay, misinformation. We already did that. Gender identity and expression. Refusing to use preferred names, refusing to use pronouns, refusing to add in electronic medical record sections preferred names or transgender related options. What I think is really interesting here is that most of us have navigated a workplace or a person where something has happened and we've had to update the Rolodex card in our head, right? So a great example that I can think of is a woman who was working on a college campus was pregnant and was pregnant with twins. So very, very, very pregnant. And the due date was over the summer. And so when she came back in the fall, everyone was asking about her babies, and she had a late term miscarriage. And that's pretty significant, right? And when you don't know you don't know what you don't know, you think you're being polite, and then you find information out, you very quickly update this file. Same thing if someone has a child who passes away, someone gets divorced. As a dog mom, when Leo, who's my dog, those of you that know me well know about Leo, when Leo passes away, y'all gonna have to update your cards really quickly and never ever accidentally ask me about Leo because I will be barely holding it together for a decade, right? So we can update our files. We just often don't when we're defensive to start off with. This other one that I moved on to was using different medications specific to the gender perception of someone instead of asking what they may or may not need. This is all misinformation, limited view, silence and marginalizing, obviously prioritizing what we would call like heteronormative privilege or cisgender privilege. So I just want to kind of breathe for a second. What's kind of coming up for you so far about some of these things that we have stated or that I witnessed in these particular offices, and how do you see them in your real life? This is the audience participation part, PS. Any thoughts, comments, anything you see in real life?
I think for me, the quote about, or the story you shared about the person in the wheelchair and the practitioner saying, oh, well, they can't do that, they're disabled, or whatever the comment was. My stepdad, he's since passed, but he had muscular dystrophy, so he was in a scooter permanently. And people would treat him like he wasn't human all the time, just disregard, like he didn't have cognitive functioning, and he was kind of written off in a lot of ways. So that just reminded me of the way people perceived him and kind of disregarded his humanity in a lot of ways.
It's interesting how fragile someone's humanity is because it's so dependent on other people's perception, right? Like I would think humanity would kind of be a given, but when you really start looking into it, it's not a given. And that's kind of how those unicorn points show up. Sometimes it's based on interaction, in this case, ableism. Thank you for sharing. And sometimes it's just based on kind of routine, Naughty put in the chat, I'm perceived much younger and have felt dismissed by medical staff. Naughty is a friend of mine and is short. So we are talking a lot about just what height can do. I know that we live in the same town, and so Naughty, you might appreciate this, but of many surgeries I've had in the last 20 years in my little weird town, I was unconscious, meaning like the not unconscious, I guess the anesthetic had kicked in, but I was out. I had no idea, nothing, out, ready to go to surgery, was being wheeled away to surgery. And somebody somewhere realized that they forgot to give me a pregnancy test before doing the surgery. So like very quickly had to like raise me back into consciousness, screw up the surgery schedule for everyone, bring me back so that I could like talk and answer questions about pregnancy, give me a pregnancy test, put me back under, and then get me back to surgery. I do not recall this, but evidently, as a queer person who has had a hysterectomy, I said something to the effect very loudly that unless Jesus is getting a sibling, I don't need a pregnancy test. It was very funny, but very disruptive to the surgery process, right? Okay, great. Sexual identity, another category. How many gay people are here? Some of y'all have even kind of asked, like how many trans people exist. And so my counter to that is how many cis people exist or non-trans people exist. Only men who have sex with men should be regularly tested for STDs. That's not true, but that is also how STD or STI infection rates are still increasing because of the bias of who actually gets tested for them. Again, misinformation, limiting view, diversity in general. We kind of started off with one of these, but whatever hoops you had to do, you got the job. This is in reference to someone who feels like their coworker was hired because of their social identities and not their experience. That's a really hard starting place to have a professional relationship when your coworker thinks that you were only hired because of identities instead of experience. All of the doctors are male. There are 0 people of color on staff in any position. And this is a health educator position in a very diverse rural area. Imagine what that feels like. Also, I would say, let's extrapolate even more that if patients of color or family community members, families, etc. of color are going into this particular health center and they only see white people, again, representation matters. But imagine the like unconscious power dynamics that are related to patient and doctor, access to relieving of pain or illness, and the people experiencing pain and illness. Going back all the way to the very first slide, race might actually impact someone's healthcare, right? All of these things matter, and it's a lot of direct evidence of things that are often unconscious. Some of these I think actually were said consciously, which is a whole nother HR conversation. But in our regular daily lives, I want us to think about how our conscious and unconscious conversations, even one-liners, sense of humor, choices we're making, what that might feel like for other people. She can't really be the face of health education because she's so overweight. Larger people or heavier people can also be very healthy, can be great educators. Skinny people can also be very unhealthy, right? Like that's a true statement. She needs to stop eating so much. That was actually said to me. I had a meeting with a pharmacist this week, and I have 47,000 supplements I'm supposed to be taking right now. And she recommended that I take them between meals. And I said, okay, well, I kind of do this intermittent fasting thing, so I really only eat 1 time a day. And she goes, that's really funny. Just take the pills between lunch and dinner and breakfast and lunch. And I was like, okay. Again, I eat like 1 meal a day. So do I take it before the meal, after the meal, or like somewhere in the middle of the fast? But because I'm a heavier person, she didn't believe I only eat 1 meal a day and never got there. So now I just have to kind of guess when I should take these pills. Not all bodies are beautiful. a lab tech actually said this, responding to a sticker that was on a wheelchair that said, "My body is beautiful." Obviously, this kind of affirmation or lack thereof can lead to more disordered eating, can lead to people not sharing about themselves, and also make it okay to make fun of these things and use this kind of humor in choices. Xenophobia, which literally means like the fear of people not like you, it shows up a lot in immigration and refugee kind of conversations. Not being able to pronounce someone's name or having them constantly have to say their name again because you can't update the file in your head, or giving somebody kind of a quote typical American name instead of actually acknowledging what someone's name is. What it means to speak English properly and who has access to learning that, or feeling like someone needs to learn a second language or third language before they engage in school. Connecting immigration, class, race with different kinds of illness as well can also be very, very limiting. Emily put something in the chat. I've seen the diversity hire thing in academia and engineering specifically. It happens all the time. And even as like a white person, I am often the quote diversity hire at a conference because I have different colored hair or I talk about diversity. And then in a cute way, the conference planning committee will call me a diversity hire, which I find fascinating. Like, yes, I'm a queer person. Yes, I talk about diversity, but like, even if you're going to boil this down to visual, you don't know what color my hair is going to be the day of the conference, and that's not enough for diversity. In conference planning, I've also seen this coming up with the MC of an event is often a woman or a person of color, or bonus, a woman of color. And then all the speakers are white men. And so then now the conference has been diversified, but the role of the MC isn't respected as a different skill set from the keynoter. Anyway, I have a therapist. Okay. Race generally comes up quite often. Here are some examples. This one really was fascinating. I was actually with a friend who was going to a doctor's appointment. So I went so I could listen to different parts than just lurking in a health lab lounge. And they were given a pregnancy test with no directions because they were perceived as Latina. Fascinating. She had never taken a pregnancy test and so needed the directions. And they had actually, the lab tech had actually thrown the directions away so close to where the pregnancy tests were stored and far away from her. She had to go all the way back and dig them out of the trash to bring them the directions. And then she actually said that she didn't know how to speak Spanish, so she couldn't give her the directions. And my friend speaks English. These are generally just based on stereotypes, but again, I just want us to notice how easy it is for stereotypes to kind of slip in to our conversation consciously or unconsciously. Kendra says many doctors are insensitive or dismissive when it comes to mental illness. Well, that's true. And many doctors actually are experiencing mental illness, and that's part of their defense mechanism is they won't acknowledge it in other people because they'd have to acknowledge it in themselves. That's another kind of circle I have to deal with all the time. Language generally, white female doctor is unable to use appropriate medical terminology to refer to male genitals. How can we expect patients to take care of themselves and communicate medical needs or ask questions? What I mean by this is that this is a woman doctor, white woman doctor, who could not use the word testicles. Like she just couldn't say that word. It made her blush or something. Like it just wasn't appropriate. But kind of that's your job, right? Like imagine an auto mechanic who just can't bring themselves to say carburetor and they come up with some cutesy name for carburetor. That's a really weird way to kind of create body dissonance from the patient. Anyway, these things happen so often. Okay, beliefs, politics, and religion. Remember, we did the session specifically on kind of allowing our own belief systems to be questioned and see what messages you learned across your own belief systems. Brochures about hooking up online in the waiting area will encourage students to do it by virtue of having information available. Having a consultant come in, that's me, demeans the person who they would be helping. So by asking for help, it doesn't empower the other person to help themselves. But sometimes we can't help ourselves, and that's why you bring an outsider in. We don't need to do family planning services. That to me is also really interesting. Only Christmas decorations in the building. Christmas comes up for a lot of times for me of like, what are we supposed to do? And I probably have an opinion. Well, I mean, I have an opinion on everything, but I probably have an opinion that's surprising. And what I mean by that is if you're celebrating Christmas, don't call it a holiday, right? If you're celebrating Christmas, you don't have to make it blue to include Hanukkah because you're celebrating Christmas. So just be honest, in my opinion, just be honest with whatever it is that you're actually celebrating. And if you are celebrating Christmas because it is a high holiday in your religious or faith, then give space, time, funding, days off, etc., for other religious high holidays. Hanukkah is not the highest holiday in the Jewish faith, but it is the Jewish holiday closest to Christmas. So we are celebrating Hanukkah because it makes Christians feel more comfortable so that they feel like they're being inclusive, but it's not actually a high holiday. Ramadan is coming up. If you're talking about Yom Kippur or other high holidays, like be honest with what you're doing and then leave space to do that. If you really are celebrating other high holidays, then other high holidays need to be in your consciousness with space, funding, etc. That's the part that we tend to miss. So instead, we have a Christmas tree up that's blue that says Happy Holidays. That is a Christmas tree because that doesn't make any sense. You're welcome. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Okay. Making up nicknames for female staff because this particular male doctor says he can't remember the names, but he conveniently can remember the names of all the other men in the office, but none of the women. None of the women have names. They all have cute little nicknames. This doctor actually still works in this health center, and he now numbers the women because there are 4 brunettes in the office, and that's just too confusing. So the blondes have nicknames and the brunettes have numbers. Just throwing that out there. When this particular patient presents with bruises and cuts from a domestic violence situation, the nurse dismisses it as their role within making him mad. So when there's an assumption about the partner. I have also seen this come up with people who consensually involve themselves in a BDSM kind of relationships where there might be bruises or physical body marks related to consensual, sexual, emotional arousal based activities. And it gets reported as domestic violence instead of someone being able to ask about what kind of sexual activities someone engages in. Also, because of that, then people who have visible marks, even if they were consensual, will not go to the doctor until those marks have healed themselves because they don't want to have a conversation with their health practitioner about their actual sexual activities. That does not seem good. Can't we just like, what's going on with you? Great. I'll make notes of that and put that into the calculations of me giving you care. Seems easy enough. Mental health comes up. And Kendra, I think maybe this will kind of get to it as well, but please add if you have other thoughts. But referencing a student receiving mental health treatment as she is dangerous and more likely to perpetuate harm because you happen to disclose that they're in some kind of mental health treatment. Patient seems to have a target on their back. They're always asking for it. Excellent. Blaming the victim. That's a way to go. Good job. Not good job. I'm being sarcastic in case you're on a treadmill. These things can be create an unwelcoming relationship. They're often sexist, divisive, defensive making, based in defensiveness, silencing assumptions. And again, heteronormativity, just assuming that everything is heterosexual is kind of an accidental assumption most people make because you don't know what you don't know. So knowing what you don't know is what do you do, right? So what do you know? What are you aware of the people that you're dealing with? And of the information that you are aware of the people that you are dealing with, is there key information that you now can think of that you do not know about the people that you think you know? chances are, yes, right? Like, I don't know if any of you are in any long-term relationships, but I've been married for almost 20 years and I'm still learning stuff about my partner. We're still like slowly disclosing things to each other. There's also things that I assume that my partner was with me then, and I have to be like, oh yeah, that was before we even met. But I can't like I don't know what my life was like before that person. That's almost a romantic thing to say, except those of you that know me just know, like, no, literally, I assume Lauren went to college with me. Lauren did not go to college with me. So I have to slowly disclose things that I assume he knows because I have now forgotten when I met him and when I did not meet him. See, I took the romance right out of that. So what do you know? What do you know you don't know? And there is so much more stuff that you have no idea you don't even know. And no, I'm not going to tell you what color socks I'm wearing. Okay, so here is a document that I'm going to highly recommend you snarf. What is fascinating about this particular document is it's specific to healthcare. It came out a really long time ago. A whole bunch of people said it was amazing and nobody knows about it. I have yet to speak at a healthcare conference that was like, oh yeah, the class, we totally know what that is. This particular statement talks about how you are going to be intentional and interrupt these kind of unconscious positive or negative biases. Thank you, Pat Dwyer. You're infringing on Emily's administrative assistant skills in the chat. It's totally free. I learned about it reading a book called Seeing Patients, which I really recommend. It's also fascinating. I think there's a picture of the book in here. But what is interesting to me is that this was a huge initiative involving multiple countries to agree on how to check conscious and unconscious, positive and negative bias in healthcare. All this work was done. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. Nobody has seen it. It's very long, but the whole thing is free. You can download it. But why I find this so interesting is that as a consultant that comes into organizations, I often am helping people write these documents. I'm helping people do all the work that gets summarized into number 13 of this document. Then I leave, and then it's up to you and your organization to do something with the document. The thing that you, this is the book I was talking about, the thing that you believed in, worked so hard on. And what ends up happening is that doesn't happen because the culture of our workplace is so permanent, even though we are making it up and keeping it alive at all times, that even doing the work that creates one of these documents that I believe came out in 2001 doesn't actually impact the culture. So I'm telling you how to give me less job security. And that is all of the different committees and task force and things that you work on inside your organizations. You could do something with the conclusions that you come to instead of the conclusions being the conclusions. And I think that tends to be kind of what happens. If the conclusions are the conclusions, that's not actually doing work. That's what I'm referring. I actually talk about this in my new book, but I believe a lot of times we want to look like we are doing work. We want to feel busy. We'd like our muscles to ache a little bit and us to be able to witness a struggle so that we can feel like we are doing work and that work is hard and we feel the hardness of the work, but we don't actually implement the actual results of that work. The hardness feels like the work, not the implementation of the work. And knowing what you know is free. Knowing what you don't know is free. Knowing that there is more of this stuff than you will ever know of that you don't even know you don't know is free. But there's no struggle there. And so it doesn't feel like work. If we can understand that a goal is recognizing or taking responsibility for, I'm going to edit this, a lifelong connection with the random stranger. We like pick up their pen because they dropped a pen on a sidewalk and we hand it to them and we keep walking. That interaction might be so memorable to the other person that they carry it with them for the rest of their lives. You didn't even consciously do anything. But that's the impact that we have and the ability to impact other people. And if we could potentially interact with one another on that level, with that level of responsibility, our muscles don't hurt, but our work begins to matter. So before we get into more stuff, I want to kind of pause there and see, how are you doing? What are you thinking? What's going on out there? How may I help? I don't have any text yet, but the texting number is 202-670-4262. How are we doing out there? Thank you, Emily. Thoughts, comments? Any observations of things that you have experienced? Extra bonus points if there are things that you want to do or don't want to do, or you've caught yourself saying or thinking in real life, even if it's just at the grocery store. Oh, Kendra, you like my comments about Christmas. That's amazing. Usually that's very, very, very upsetting to people. You're welcome, Ava. Thoughts, comments, anything? Just curious, Emily says, why healthcare seems very specific compared to your other webinars. Yeah, so I created this for a conference that was on specific to healthcare services. Like, that's why I created it. But then I began to use it in different contexts because it's a really helpful metaphor for people who do not work in healthcare. So instead of like, these are horrible things I have said, sometimes that's a lot. And like, as y'all have been doing the messages I learned processes, there's a possibility that you've come to a place where you're like, I don't want to remember this about myself. So if you don't work in healthcare, I can say like, let's look over here at this thing that's not me. And then I can look at these statements and be like, oh, I can relate. I have heard these things. I have said these things. There's people in my life that have said these things. There's people in my life that have had these things said to them. Oh, look, I have space now to hold these realities without feeling so defensive. So then I started using the collection outside of health specific audiences, because I find sometimes our consciousness needs a little distance in the metaphor to really understand. It's a great question. And maybe I'm wrong. Feel free to be like, yeah, this was too specific. I don't know. Couldn't relate. Nadi says, while you were talking, I got a call to schedule a CT scan. Laugh out loud, so I missed stuff. We'll watch video later. Oh, sorry, Nadi. Yes, but I am recording it, so good job. Okay, I don't have any text, but you're welcome to keep the text coming, right? 202-670-4262. It's a great example of collusion. Thank you. Look at you. Someone did their homework. Is that the people saying the thing would be participating in a marginalizing or silencing act, right? But hearing it, being on the staff where these kind of comments are just normalized, that would be collusion. Great example. Okay, now the chats are coming in. Okay. Is there a movement towards owning your biases, like the Christmas option, and in that justifying your opinion as fact? I feel there are many different parts to this question, and it's intermingled with many other things. Yeah, I think we sum that up, Pat, with shit's complicated. But at the root of shit's complicated is pretty simple, right? So what I think is so interesting is that let's keep on the Christmas thing, okay? Do I have permission to keep on this Christmas thing? People are trying so hard to say that pinko commie liberals are trying to cancel Christmas. First off, I am personally all about canceling Christmas. I am Grinch. I do not like this idea, but I don't like this idea not because of basically trampling on any other high holiday. What I don't like about it is I don't like forced consumerism. So it's much more about capitalism, the amount of plastic that is generated because and by we, I mean Christian dominant culture, has decided that this is the time of the year to basically sprinkle plastic in every square inch of our house. That is what I don't like about it. So there's like an environmental, consumerist, forced thing that I don't like. Now, let's be honest. Sparkly tinsel. Oh my God, I love it so much. Lights in trees, like the little white lights, don't tell anybody, I think are beautiful because I didn't grow up with snow. And so I don't know the starlight twinkling on snow bits. I know white lights in trees. Love it. I'm not allowed to say that though, because that's also consumerist and also uses electricity and is a safety hazard. Why are you crawling up in trees? I digress. When people are trying really hard to justify what they want to do and then they cover up what they want to do as an act of inclusion, they're lying to themselves and others. You want to have a Christmas tree, knock it out of the park, have a Christmas tree. But if you want to have a Christmas tree because it's a symbol of something that's really important to you, that maybe feels consumeristic, maybe isn't even connected to a particular religious faith, now it's just kind of a cultural thing. Very early on, Naughty, you asked, what's the difference between racial identification, ethnicity, and culture? I think this is a great time to kind of review this. Is that some people have family traditions that they do that are not necessarily related to a religious practice. That might be a culture thing. When we're talking about ethnicity, for example, there might be variations of cultures. There might be a lot of people who do certain things the way that you do certain things. There's a really great book I read that was, I think it is called After a Long Silence. I'm going to mess that up. I think that's what the book is called. And basically, I'm going to spoiler alert the book. It's a great book, though. Is that this woman realized that she is a descendant of someone who escaped the Holocaust and not necessarily an Italian Catholic, because she started looking at her own family traditions. Now, those traditions could be cultural, could be ethnic related, could be racial, or just something grandma did. I don't know. But anyway, she realized that the cookies that her grandmother made were not Italian cookies. They were, I think, Polish cookies. And she was like, well, that's weird. Why would an Italian be making a Polish cookie at this particular time of the year? And she started doing investigations into her own family lineage and uncovered her grandmother and her grandmother's sister escaped Poland or whatever it was and ran away to Italy to avoid being taken away in the Holocaust, and that she actually has a Jewish heritage. What? And it's all because of a particular like location of where these cookies are generally made. Even though that seems like a digression. Whatever it is that you are doing in the time period that is referred to as Christmas, do it, knock it out, enjoy it, but call it what it is. Don't secretly do it and call it something else, because that's gross, right? And if you want space to be able to perform the thing that's important to you, if you're going to try and be inclusive about it, give space, budget, and time for other people to do other things that are important to them. That's it. That's actual inclusion. Having a secret Christmas tree that's blue with a big sign on it that says Happy Holidays that isn't actually your Christmas tree, I've actually heard them referred to as work Christmas trees. Work Christmas trees. You're hiding what you're trying to do. Just do what you're trying to do. Do that. I worked at a multicultural center at Arizona State in the early 2000s, and the multicultural center wanted to do one of those pancake make things at the beginning of the year to like welcome all the students back, where all the faculty and staff and the president or whatever, he's a jerk, so he didn't do it, would make pancakes for the students. They picked Ramadan to make pancakes. It's the multicultural center. So I'm in a meeting and I'm like, hi, can we do this like after the sun's gone down? And they were like, well, who eats pancakes at night? I'm like, first off, anybody wanting free food. That's who eats pancakes at night. And number two, if we do it after sundown, we'll actually be inclusive of one of our largest populations on campus who may or may not be actually celebrating Ramadan. The director of the Multicultural Center Googled Ramadan because she was not aware that it had a thing connected to it related to eating. We can't assume that everybody knows everything because most people don't know a lot. But can you be responsible for what you do know? That's important, right? For the record, we did pancakes at 10 a.m. because I was outvoted and it was inconvenient for people to stay at work late at night. This is why I'm self-employed. Okay. Pat says, oh, we already did that one. Ava says, how long will the recordings be up? I have a few I need to catch up on. It's a playlist. It's public. It'll be there forever because I don't know how to delete playlists. So knock yourself out. I hate Halloween for the amount of junk it creates. Awesome. Here's a fun fact. One of my favorite candies is Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. Please hear, I did not say Reese's Pieces. Those are disgusting. Reese's Peanut Butter Cups are my favorite. What are my all-time favorite Reese's Peanut Butter Cups? All the ones that come out at the holidays. Because I don't know why, the peanut butter tastes different. Do y'all know what I'm talking about? the Easter egg Reese's peanut butter cups, the Christmas trees, the little Halloween pumpkins, whatever. They are the best of the Reese's peanut butter cups. This is fighting words. I will take us down. Regular peanut butter cups will do. They will suffice in between. But I get real excited when I see a Reese's peanut butter cup pumpkin, Christmas tree, or Easter egg, which is usually how I know there is some Christian holiday coming up. Fascinating. So I love me some Christian holidays because they change the shape of my Reese's peanut butter cups. See, we can do this together. All right. Ava says, wow, is that because I don't know how to delete a playlist? Probably. Up here in the North, Canada, we don't have more than one kind of Reese's peanut butter cups. I know there's a lot of things in Canada that you don't have that we have, but you have healthcare. So, okay. Okay. I didn't know what I didn't know. Is the chocolate and the peanut butter, it's the chocolate peanut butter ratio. I don't know if it's the ratio thing or I think it's a different quality of peanut butter. They don't last long enough for me to do a real comparo, but we'll see. Okay. No, it was the Ramadan thing. Okay, great. Okay. So 202-670-4262 is the texting number. I did get a text that was asking me about plastic. And most of the plastic is not recyclable, and there's just so much of it, and it's all a petroleum-based product, and it drives me crazy. And if you look at what is plastic, it's usually something stupid that I am embarrassed is probably going to last on the planet longer than I am. That's why I don't like plastic. Okay, that was a text. Okay, book club. Yesterday, I got a bunch of questions about the book club. So I want to make sure that everybody is super clear on what this is. So number one, this book, Good Enough Now, I do this a lot in my office. That's why it's sitting there. So Good Enough Now is a book that I wrote originally in 2015, and then I came out with the second edition when COVID hit, because what the hell else was I going to do? And the idea of Good Enough Now was to do individual work to help you figure out who and how you got the way you got to be. No judgment about it, but it's a lot of self-reflection kind of activities that you do that determines how you are doing. It goes through that head, heart, action model that we did in an earlier webinar, and it's all about you. At the back of the book are discussion questions. And so when I do a book club, I divide it into 4 or 5 Zoom sections. Those are the of us that want to do the big group book club. We'll do a doodle. I'll pick the popular 4 or 5 dates, and we'll just talk about in kind of a meta way each section of the book. You don't have to disclose the stuff you learned about yourself. We'll just talk about how it's feeling now. Okay. So the book club, $47 is for the individual. You get a free book. I think they're like $16 on Amazon. So the rest of it just feeds my dogs, basically. We'll do 4 or 5 different Zoom sessions to talk about the discussion questions. Some people are very interested in just their own organizations or offices having a book club as like an internal professional development. So I wanted to make that available for folks. So for 10 people or less, because you get free books, yeah, I will mail you the 10 books. We'll pick internal times that work best for my schedule and your office. And then we'll do the book club 4 or 5 meetings just with your internal team. Can you do this with 10 of your friends? Sure, I don't care. If you have a book club in your own world that you're a part of, can you do it that? Sure, sounds great. It can be any group. Does it have to be 10 people? What if I only have 8? Sure. What if I have 14? Well, it'll balance out for the one I'm doing for 8. I am not really a very stickler salesperson, so I'm pretty flexible. In theory, you need to sign up for this by the end of this webinar series. Tomorrow is the last webinar. Some of you have said, I asked my boss, but I haven't heard back. Well, you've now told me that, so you're on the radar screen. I'm probably not going to cut you off tomorrow at 9 a.m. But just let me know before tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific, because that's when the webinar series ends, and we'll stay in touch and see what happens. I am a pretty rational human being. All right. We are doing this to support Crazy Horse Memorial. So I am giving up to $2,024 to Crazy Horse Memorial based on how many people register. So please keep registering because that's exciting. I would like to point out like over 100 people have watched the starting place video. This is making me very, very exciting. as I can see the little numbers. I've gotten 2 comments from haters because the playlist is public. So one of them, Go To Move, talks about how boring my voice is, but at least they're not. The very first comment I ever got on YouTube was listening to me made them want to stab their eyeballs with an ice pick. But I don't just focus on the negative comments. Anyway, I deleted the comments I don't like. If you're watching the video, please feel free to add comments, subscribe, do the YouTube juice because it's good for something that I don't understand. If you have an employer match, please donate to Crazy Horse if you haven't already. I'll put an email out of how much money was donated during this period of time. I'll donate, etc. But please do that. Use the QR code. And then I mentioned my brand new book. I'm very excited. I submitted a draft to the fancy publisher that I'm hoping will publish it, and is probably not going to watch this video on Sunday. I meet with them on the 21st. Wish me luck. If they say no, they're dumb. But if they say yes, but they want to change the book too much, they're still dumb. And I will self-publish the book. If they say yes, we love it almost as it is, except we ran spell check. Then I'm going to publish it, but I'm going to have something tangible, which is probably going to be the case studies that are in the book available before the election. So the current working title of the book is What If It Happens? When Answers Need to Ask More Questions. And so I am using my real clients' DEI failed initiatives to showcase what they're doing wellish and almost making a real impact in their office and what they could do that would have made a better impact or made the initiative work better. So we're learning from their failures. All names have been changed to protect the well-intentioned. So that is the book. You're welcome to send me an email to sign up for a pre-order list. Some of you have already done this, which means I really have to write the book. Put in the subject, What If It Happens pre-order? Just send me an email and you will get a free copy of the book when it is in my hands, which will be hopefully before the election. That's the big plan. So tomorrow, last webinar, I would like to see some tears. I'll wait. Yeah, tomorrow's last webinar because my boss only wanted to do 12 of them. So tomorrow is back to the series that I typically do as a webinar series. We do starting place, unconscious bias, a wild card. We've been doing wild cards for a long time now as different options. And then the last one is working across difference and making better connections. So that webinar will be tomorrow, and that's how I typically wrap up the whole series. You can still register. I'm very excited about it. Please sign up to pre-order my book. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Emily just put the playlist into the chat. You should be getting an email from me after each webinar that gets the playlist and whatever resources. Yesterday, I highlighted Emily and Regina's TED Talks. Those links are in it. And then because I'm a triple Virgo, I have been keeping all of those links into a wrap-up email where you're going to get everything all at once as well, because people have been joining in throughout the webinar series. So with that, thoughts, comments, questions, anything I can help with? Texting number again is 202-670-4262. This has been super fun, and I will hopefully see y'all tomorrow. Last ones tomorrow. Thanks for coming. Bye, y'all.